I'll get right into it. Over the past few weeks, there have been several leaks by playtesters of Dragon Age Dreadwolf, including several leaked screenshots and one very short video clip. I'll show you those, but we're going to start from the top here. I want to say that I hesitated before making a video about this. Leaks, especially leaks up to a year from the game's release, will not reflect the state and polish of the final release, so putting too much weight on them can be both misleading and not very fair to the developers. Ultimately, there are details in here I suspect will make it to the final release though, so it makes sense to cover it. I only ask you to remember that this information does not necessarily represent the final game, and take that into account as you process this information. The kickoff for this was a piece by Tom Henderson at Insider Gaming. I want to say up front that I take some issue with how this article frames the information. It starts with recounting the switch away from multiplayer to single-player focus previously reported by Jason Schreier, and claims that the multiplayer DNA can still be sensed according to two anonymous sources that spoke to Insider Gaming. The evidence for this is that the game has a central hub from which the player will set out on missions, which is apparently, quote, somewhat like Destiny, unquote. Furthermore, this hub will become filled with companion characters that you recruit. To me, that sounds like Skyhold, or any other similar hub that is actually nothing new to RPGs, so the link there seems rather tenuous. Also, the player character will apparently travel to and from this hub via magic mirror portals, presumably Alluvians, as seen in the Dragon Age Inquisition Trespasser DLC. The leak is a bit more interesting when it starts to get into the gameplay description. It's described as being more hack and slash than previous games, with an ability wheel that allows the player to select which abilities their companions use. The article compares this to Final Fantasy XV, but to me this sounds just like the Mass Effect ability wheel. The general impression I have of the sources for this article is that they are not very familiar with BioWare games or RPGs in general. The article closes out by noting that, given the frequent use of placeholder text and unrecorded voice lines they encountered in their playtest, the game is unlikely to release this year and will instead be released in 2024. I have to disagree with this somewhat if the presence of placeholders is their main point of evidence. As I mentioned in my Alpha Milestone video last year, it is common for a game at that point to still have many placeholder elements like this, those things that won't be finalized until the latter stage of development. In short, this does not sound like anything new from what we suspected the game was like when they announced the Alpha Milestone a few months ago. At that point, myself and people who understand these things a lot better than me, like former BioWare lead Mark Dara, believed late 2023 to early 2024 was the likely release window. I see no reason to change that view. In short, there are some interesting tidbits here, but I don't quite agree with how the writer of this article is interpreting the information. In response to this article, some Reddit users decided to share their playtest information, this time with images. Now, I should say that this first source indicates they received the information secondhand. They received 20 minutes of gameplay footage from an early alpha playtest, suggesting that this playtest occurred over a year ago in early 2022, much earlier than the sources from the Insider Gaming article supposedly played it. Keep that in mind because it means that visuals in these images are probably very rough relative to the final product. This footage and the post describing it portray a mission taking place in the Grey Warden headquarters of Weishaupt. It describes a lot of unfinished textures and a completely missing skybox as the player moves through what seems to be a set-piece fight with a dragon. It reminds me a lot of the dragon popping in during the Adamant Fortress level in Dragon Age Inquisition from the way it's described. The fortress is under attack by darkspawn infused with red lyrium. The player was apparently expected to chain up the dragon at the end of the level. According to a commenter, who also claims to be a playtester, there's a sword that has some significance to this quest, though it's unclear what. The player character in this case is described as an Elvish Knight class, though the character screen describes them as a Grey Warden. I'll comment more on that in a moment, but I want to finish going over the post. It ends with some bullet points. The combat is indeed more action-focused, with the God of War 2018 game as a reference point. The Sword and Shield character was apparently able to parry and counter attacking enemies. There is indeed an ability wheel that can be brought up, which is similar to those in past games. Taking direct control of party members is not possible, though you may be able to tell them what abilities to use, which was apparently disabled in this specific older build. Animation quality has apparently vastly improved over previous games. As well, the hair animation is apparently much better. It actually flows and moves. The jump button has also returned. Lastly, the UI is very similar to Dragon Age Inquisition, though that is something that could very well be updated prior to release. Okay, let's look at that character screen. So we have a character with an equipment system that looks similar to Dragon Age Inquisition. There are slots for weapon and shield or offhand weapon. There appear to be enchantment or otherwise upgrade slots for the weapon, one armor slot and one helmet slot, as well as amulet, belt, and 2 ring accessory slots. On the right appears to be 3 abilities. However, I don't think we are limited to that. Let's take a look at the combat footage. There are 4 ability slots visible, but 2 of them appear to be disabled for this playtest, and one other ability appears to be some sort of special ability rather than taking up one of the 4 slots. So we will have at least 5 ability actions we can take at a time. I hope maybe we will be able to page over to another set of 4 abilities, but that's all we can see. Again though, the user interface has probably evolved since these images were taken. Back to the character screen, over on the side we see 3 blocked out stats: armor, health, and guard, which appear to be the only stats visible. Above that, we have some interesting character information. Inside this diamond, there is a word hero, with something blocked out underneath it. I personally suspect this is actually the character name, since the person who took this screenshot seems to have blocked out any identifying or unique information that might be traceable so they aren't found out by EA. Above that, we see that this character is a level something Grey Warden. Now, that could mean that Grey Warden is a class, but that would be weird to me. Due in part to something another Reddit playtester said, I suspect Grey Warden might be a character background. More on that later. At the top of the screen, we can see Map, Character, Companions, Skills, and Collections menus. The first is self-explanatory, I think, and we're looking at the second one. Companions just confirms that, yes, this is a party-based game despite the action focus. Skills is probably skill trees and selection for what we want to use. Collections might include the general inventory as well as collectibles and quest items. I don't have much commentary on the rest of the images except to say that it does very much look like Weishaupt, including a very large set of doors with griffins on them. There's a hodgepodge of characters in that scene holding the door shut, but they look like placeholders to me, so I'm not going to read into them. Now, there were a few other Reddit posters that crawled out in the comments to confirm the information from the Insider Gaming piece and this playtest. I won't go over all of those, but one offered a few additional pieces of information that I will repeat for you. He claimed to have been part of a playtest within the last few months, so almost a year after the playtest these images are from. For starters, he mostly shares my view that the source from the Game Insider piece seems to not be very familiar with BioWare games. He confirms that the playtest he played features a Mass Effect-like ability wheel that allows players to select abilities for their companions to use. During the test, he was only able to use 4 abilities, and the companions were not playable, much like the old playtest. Otherwise, he said it reminded him of Mass Effect Andromeda. Andromeda with melee is what he said. Andromeda had quite a bit of mobility, so I'm interpreting that to mean it feels a lot more dynamic than Inquisition did. The player's party consists of 4 characters, including the player character and 3 companions. There was no tactical camera or top-down view. Character stats were leveled automatically upon level up. The game apparently looks very good and way better than this old playtest, though the facial animations were pretty stiff. That's the sort of thing that might still be a placeholder before a final refining pass, so that doesn't bother me at this point. The most interesting tidbit he has to add is that the player character is named Rook. It appears in the glitched subtitles of the leaked screenshots as well. Now, however you feel about that, I want to add my speculation that Rook is probably a code name. I'm not the first person to speculate this at all, but it does make sense. In Inquisition, the covert agents of the Inquisition would be given code names like Charter. So, if we go with the premise that our character is recruited by the Inquisition to fight the Dreadwolf, it makes sense that we would have a code name. He also says that Grey Warden is not a class, despite how it appears on the character screen image. This is what I mentioned earlier. It leads me to think that we might get to choose our character's background, and one of those seems to be Grey Warden. This suggests that the backgrounds are probably not race or class specific, since any race can join the Wardens. Others, like the Lords of Fortune, could be similar. Lastly, the poster was asked if they could express each of the 3 companions they saw as an emoji. They responded with a black elf, a red-haired woman, and a wizard. I'll let you make of that what you will. To wrap things up, I want to remind people that the images I've shared come from an early alpha playtest that was done about a year ago, so don't treat it as an accurate representation of the game's visual quality. However, given that playtesters who claim to have played it much more recently describe the mechanics as being very similar, I would resign yourself to the idea that Dragon Age Dreadwolf is very much an action RPG with emphasis on the action in terms of the gameplay. They could still make companions controllable, but at this point I'm not expecting it. Expect to be able to give them commands, but otherwise only control your player character. Let me know what you think of these leaks in the comments. As I said, I think the most we can take away from this is how the combat in Dreadwolf will work. I would be disappointed if we can't directly control companion characters, but it's not a deal breaker for me. I'm into Dragon Age and RPGs in general for story, characters, and world building. As long as that stuff works out, a more action-oriented combat system is not a big deal to me. Everything else is a bit speculative in terms of what it actually means and what it will be like at release. I'll leave things here for now. Subscribe for more Dragon Age and Cyberpunk coverage in the future. For now, I hope you have a good week.